Good morning. Thank you everybody for being here. I just wanted to go over this is the presentation for my signature project, which is entitled Increasing Proficiency Scores for Decatur High School. First, we had a survey. Survey consisted of 5 questions, and the results from the survey varied, but two common areas of improvement came through. Parental involvement and student engagement were cited by the respondents. The respondents were teachers at Decatur High School. We have roughly a faculty of about 55, and so the respondents were our 55 teachers. I also surveyed our 4 counselors and our 4 administrators. They were also involved. So, right about 64 total people. The state report card, we analyzed it as well, and the assessment data provided by the State Department of Education indicates academic achievement, as specifically for reading efficiency in all tested areas as a weakness. And therefore, what I decided to do, kind of based on the survey, was that we're going to focus on increasing overall student achievement at Decatur High School. Looking a little bit further, when we gathered some data, the largest percentage of responses reported student engagement and parental involvement as weaknesses. The third most common response was reading proficiency. And the responses that received 7%, which were, just 1 and 2 votes apiece, were student incentives, classroom management, student accountability, common assessments, and then attendance. The state report card data indicates that Decatur High School's student proficiency rate in ELA was about 34%, which is 14 points below the state average. And looking at the state ELA data over the last 5 cycles, the student proficiency rate indicates a plateau in this area. And our students have scored well below the state average in ELA and reading proficiency in the last 7 years. Here you can see a chart of that data that I just went over with everybody. And again, these are votes from the survey specifically. As you can see, the breakdown of that in our areas of weakness at Decatur High School. This slide illustrates the proficiency data from the state report card, which is 21 and 22. So the state report card is, a year in the rears. So this is our most recent report card in 2023, but the data is from 2021 and 2022. And you can see that our school data is in ELA well below the state average. Math, science is pretty even. Math is above the state average, but ELA is below. So we chose to look at ELA. Our ELA reading proficiency scores. This is the state report card, the data that I just showed you, but over the last really 5 years, 2 of those COVID years, there wasn't a state report card. So I went back to get 5 years of data, and it kind of illustrates 2016 was 32.1 for our school. We did get a rise, and we kind of clipped in 2018 at 39.34, but we've had a little bit of a decline since 2018 in the ELA reading proficiency scores, and so therefore we wanted to look at ELA proficiency for our students specifically at Decatur High School. This chart illustrates the same data over the period of those last 5 years from the state report card, and it's just a breakdown of those specific numbers. College and career readiness, absenteeism. We had a little bit of a rise, but we've gone back down. Our graduation rate is fairly steady, although we are below 90%. There's some issues at Decatur with regard to some of our special education students that are housed at Decatur in some of our special programs that kind of keep us at around that 90 level. So even though that's a little low for this past year, we're trending kind of as much as we can with some of our populations. But we wanted to really look at academic achievement and then our academic growth area on last year's report card. We had a pretty big dip in that. So that just gives you kind of a 5-year overview of our state report card scores. From the literature review, some schools view reading and literacy as a function of the English department. For us, it's got to be across the curriculum. So literacy needs to be taught across the curriculum, not just with the ELA department to help with some of those reading areas. And we need to make a shift in our school to be able to do that cross curriculum. One of the key areas for us for literacy proficiency and improving our literacy scores, our reading scores, is a school-wide initiative that we're doing with lesson questioning techniques, and it's concerned with each lesson teachers asking certain types of questions and scripting those questions out for the classroom, again, across the curriculum, all of our subject areas, in order to improve that way. Additionally, from the literature review, formative assessments, we're really big on having formative assessments for each of our lessons, creating exit slips and things of that nature to help improve not only standards-based instruction, but improving student discourse. So student-to-teacher discourse as well as student-to-student discourse, getting them speaking more about the lesson and a little bit more engaged. A fourth area was our Tier 2 small group instruction, and that's a school-wide initiative as well that we're looking at to improve discourse, both with student-to-teacher and then student-to-student discourse. Again, talking about the lessons, being involved and being a little bit more engaged in those areas. So you can see some of the comments from the literature review there. Our research question and hypothesis for this particular project, our action plan, will, utilizing No Red Ink, which is a web-based grammar instruction program, will, utilizing No Red Ink in English classrooms, increase student ACT English scores. That is our research question. And then our hypothesis is using No Red Ink will increase student ACT English scores. Given that, of course, that we're going to implement a program using that, not just having them use it, once or twice. Action plan and the timeline. So we began this in January of 2024, and essentially that's where we're going to. I met with the principal, and we started getting the ball rolling on utilizing the No Red Ink program. So I got permission to be able to use that from administration in place of our current bell ringer grammar program that we utilize for most of our English classes. I met with the ninth grade teachers in like a PLC, as well as our ninth grade counselor and an assistant principal in charge of ninth grade as far as discipline goes. We met together to go over this particular plan and how we wanted to utilize it. And they helped me gather a lot of the pre-ACT data for the ninth graders. So in October of 2023, our ninth and 10th graders took the pre-ACT. So we got that data. We had that data available for January, and we used that kind of as our baseline score. In February, we wanted to purchase No Red Ink school-wide, and we wanted to train our ninth grade ELA teachers to be able to utilize that and implement that program with the students. We met once again to determine a curriculum and a pacing guide after looking at the program, what we wanted to teach, in what order, what we wanted to try to accomplish in that particular limited amount of time. And then we, got consent forms. And so you can continue on there with the timeline. I'm going to skip a few of these, but essentially what we wanted to do is we wanted to meet and get together and develop a plan for instituting No Red Ink, beginning with fourth quarter of 2024. So that would begin in March. The first thing that we utilized in March was we did a pre-assessment using No Red Ink. So we had the pre-ACT scores from ninth grade, but we wanted to get a pre-assessment or a pre-test with the program, because the program did not ask questions similar to the ACT. The format was different. The content would have been the same, but the format was different in the web-based portal. So we administered the pre-assessment so that the kids, we could get an idea of some data before they began. And then beginning in the middle of March, it was the 18th, we began the implementation of using No Red Ink lessons for the first roughly 10 minutes of class as our bell ringer. And there was a curriculum and a series of lessons. They would do roughly one a day. Sometimes they would have homework that they would have to do using No Red Ink as well. to meet the timeline. But all of our ninth grade students had a consistent experience as far as what was expected of them and the assignments that they utilized. So for the implementation plan, obviously the data, we needed to improve English skills on the ACT, and a lot of that was grammar. So we utilized this program to be able to do that. Another area that, in regard to the implementation of the curriculum, is that the teacher is still the instructional leader. So therefore, even though we have this web-based platform and these kids were expected to do certain assignments, the teacher would lead the class and even provide some examples for some of the skills that they were working on. So the teacher didn't just give them a computer and tell them to do it. The teacher would float around the room and help students that had questions to try to help them. And they would also kind of begin each day with a mini lesson of some kind. So the action plan, the implementation of the action plan, I have all of the steps of the action plan listed here, as you can see. I'm really just going to go over the ones that were altered. So like for step 3, meet with the administration to purchase the premium version. They elected not to purchase the premium version, and mainly is because central office would not allow a line item like that so late in the year. However, they did say we could use the free version, which had some limited lessons. It didn't have the full program on there, but there were still many lessons that could be utilized for what we were doing. They said if the data supports us being able to buy it for 2024, 2025, they would be willing to do that. So we made that alteration from the premium version that unlocks everything to the free version that only has a limited number of lessons. For number 4, I met with the ninth grade teachers. We kind of created a PLC to go over the timeline and implementation. In that meeting is where we agreed to form a PLC, and we would start meeting weekly to go over the data of the previous lessons. That was a little bit of an alteration from our step number 4. 7, 8, and 9 were basic, just talking about getting consent, and a lot of that was waived with IRB approval because the data was going to be only utilized for this particular project, and then anything that caused a leak or a violation didn't have student names attached to it. So we were able to get that waived. Step number 12, monitor student data using reports from No Red Ink. We had the progress monitoring, but we also added monitoring for completion of assignments for students that missed class. So if we had kids that weren't there on a certain day that we were going over a lesson, the expectation was that they would go back and complete the lesson that they missed. So the goal was to just get everybody through completion of the entire program and make sure everybody completed each lesson. So if they were absent, we just came up with a plan for them to be able to make that up either on their own time at home or in a monitored time in a different class. They may do a little bit more that day or the next day. So our collaborative efforts, first the principal approved the change for our bell ringer curriculum. We saw her first, as we mentioned. And again, Ms. Russell, our principal, denied the request for the subscription service because of what I've mentioned before with the central office. But they definitely agreed that if it was the project called for being able to utilize that school-wide, they certainly were open to that idea for the next school year. Our ninth grade assistant principal helped with data collection and with monitoring of the pre-ACT data. And then the ninth grade counselor helped in that area as well. And as I mentioned, we didn't need parental consent because of the IRB approval. She wasn't really charged with having to notify the parents of the project or anything like that. Our 3 ninth grade English teachers, including myself, formulated a PLC to be responsible for delivering the instruction. And again, we met weekly. The results of the project, so our research question was, will utilizing No Red Ink in English classrooms increase student ACT English scores? So at this stage of the project, it's kind of inconclusive because our comparative data is going to be the pre-ACT ACT 10 which those ninth grade students will take in October of 2024. So because they've not taken the pre-ACT 10, which matches to the data that we had initially, we can't really call the program necessarily a success. However, we do have data from the web-based program itself, No Red Ink, that does illustrate some success on this project. So I mentioned they took a pre-test and then they took a post-test at the end of the program. The post-test results show that 31 of our 84 students demonstrated proficiency, which is a 90 to 100%. Only 19 of the 84 demonstrated proficiency on the pre-test. So we had and again, that's 90 to 100. So we had an increase there of 12 students from using the program for 9 weeks. 12 of the students increased their score, as I mentioned, to proficiency from pre-test to post-test. Now, proficiency for our terminology typically means grade level. For the No Red Ink program, proficiency actually is 90 to 100% accuracy. So it's a little bit of a higher standard, and the verbiage there makes it a little bit maybe difficult to understand. But here's a list of the classes. And these are the total students that illustrated proficiency divided by the class periods that they were in, and then ultimately we get to the total, which is the 19 that illustrated it. In addition to the proficient level, which I mentioned was 90 to 100, the program No Red Ink utilizes 4 performance bands, and it's struggling, beginning, approaching, and then the last one is proficient. So in addition to the students that raised all the way to proficiency, which is 90 to 100, we had 42 students who scored in the struggling performance band, which is pretty large, 0 to 69, on the pretest, while only 20 students scored in that band on the post-test. So 22 students moved from struggling to another band. It wasn't necessarily just up to beginning, but they were struggling on the pretest, and by the post-test, 22 students were able to move there. There were 19 students that scored in the beginning performance band, which is a 70 to 79, and a lot of times we consider this area in Alabama to be proficient, right, with 70% accuracy. So there were 19 that scored beginning on the pretest, and only 14 scored in that band on the post-test. And again, some of those students came from struggling to beginning, but a lot of our initial beginning students on the pretest moved to other levels as well by the post-test. And there was a significant trend in the approaching performance band. There was only 4 students in the approaching, which is 80 to 89, and what we're equating in this project as a goal, 80%. 19 performed in the approaching category on the post-test. So we had 15 more students that illustrated an 80 to 89% accuracy on the post-test. And here's a chart, our figure 7, that illustrates what I just mentioned to you. The light green is the pre-test, and the Kelly green colored is on the post-test. So we had obviously more kids on the pre-test in the struggling and beginning, and it almost flipped on the post-test, where most of our students were in the approaching and the proficiency category, again, approaching being 80% or higher. So based on the data, the benchmark of the English subtest of ACT is an 18, and so that would be grade level. The No Red Ink program, we're saying 80% would be grade level, and again, that might be a little bit high depending on some of the standards in the state of Alabama. But just for the project, we're saying 80% on No Red Ink would closely equate to an 18 on the ACT. So if we compare what we just looked at, the data that we just looked at our school, 34% of our ninth graders would score a benchmark of 19 or higher. Did previously. And then after the No Red Ink program, we had almost 60% of our kids in that 80% or higher category. So I'm not saying 60% of our students would make a 19 on the ACT test, but there is some reason to believe that when they take the pre-ACT 10 in October, that we could have close to that range as a 19 or higher on the pre-ACT 10. So next steps, like I mentioned, the project is not fully finished because they haven't taken the pre-ACT 10. So that's one of our last action steps that was on the plan. And so we'll do another 9-week trial when we start school in the fall in August of 2024 with those 10th graders to continue their work that they began in Q4 of 2023. And then in October, they'll take the pre-ACT 10. The results from that should be available at the beginning of December. We usually get it before or right after Thanksgiving break is when it kind of comes in. So right about the beginning of the December, we should have that data and be able to truly analyze the scores of the pre-ACT 9 and then their scores on pre-ACT 10 to determine success of the No Red Ink program in terms of the ACT. So here are my references. That's a little bit about the project. I'm looking forward to continuing in the fall and then getting those test scores back from the pre-ACT 10 to be able to follow up and let you know if this was a successful venture or not. What we've seen is some success by students. We've seen them move within the program and improve their ELA and their grammar scores, and hopefully it'll translate to the pre-ACT 10. If you have any questions, my name is Justin Moore, and you can email me. It was on the front slide. And thank you for listening. Thank you for attending.